Everyone wants to live an inspired life, yet so many people search for happiness following the footsteps of peers and taking advice from people who have different values and outcomes to which they're searching. There are people born into wealth, graduated from the best universities in the world, and there are people who have none of that and yet are living extraordinary lives full of fulfillment and reward. The purpose of this podcast is to share insights and strategies that allow you to question the status quo and think freely, so you can design your life and be who you want to be. We get one life. Time is our most valuable asset. I believe that when we're free and able to focus on meaningful work, we become better human beings. This is Always Free, and I'm your host, Jason Greystone.
Welcome to the leading podcast for financial empowerment and wealth creation. Subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can connect with Jason on social media and subscribe to the Jason Greystone YouTube channel for weekly videos. Don't forget to also subscribe to the weekly newsletter to receive frequent educational content and action steps to help you design your life so you can be who you want to be. For news on all future events and updates, go to jasongreystone.com.
Well, welcome to the podcast, guys. Very special episode, this one. Got a very special guest. If it's the first time you're listening to this podcast, you are in the number one place for financial empowerment and wealth creation. And if you haven't listened to any of the other episodes, I highly recommend you go back and start at the beginning, because I've kind of taken you on a journey and given you strategies as we go in order to build wealth. But I'm really excited about this episode because we've got a true mentor of mine, my biggest mentor, Dr. Dr Demartini. I've been studying Dr. Demartini's work for about 8 or 9 years now. I first heard about him through Daniel Priestley, who's also featured on this podcast. Daniel used to work with John. But since I've been studying his work, it's been absolutely transformational in my life. The strategies and the mindset that I've learned from Dr. Demartini is really what's allowed me. It's played the biggest majority in my personal growth. So I'm so excited to share this episode with you. I've just spent a weekend with John in his breakthrough experience, me and my wife, and I'm just now going to go over to the hotel room and we're going to catch up and we're going to do an interview. So just a bit of background on Dr. Demartini in case you don't know who he is. He's a human behavioural specialist, and although most of you might be more familiar with the more commercialised book The Secret by Rhonda Byrne or the film, John contributed to that, but he's more well known for his life-changing programs, his breakthrough experience, his Demartini method. Dr. Demartini is an absolute perfect guest for you listeners for this podcast because it's what it's all about. It's about being who you want to be, living an inspired life, and John lives and breathes by his highest values, which are researching, teaching and traveling. He travels the world. He's done something like 20 million air miles. He's delivered thousands and thousands upon thousands of programs and talks and workshops to people, and he's changed the lives of millions. So in this episode, he's specifically going to be talking about wealth building, because this is a financial empowerment podcast, and I'm really excited to see what he has to say. So let's get on with it and go meet John. So John, thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure of mine, not just for the listeners of the podcast, but a real pleasure of mine because I've studied your work for 8 to 9 years. I've just recently done the breakthrough again, so it's just absolute pleasure, honour to have you here. I love your work. So the people listening to this particular podcast have wealth on high on their values. Okay, so the people listening to this are ones that want to take action and build wealth. And what I'd love to hear from you, the way we kind of structure the podcast is around mindset first, and then some strategies, and then some action steps. So in terms of mindset, I'd love to hear a bit about your hierarchy of values, first of all, because I understand it and I've studied it for many years, but people listening to this might be struggling where maybe their partner isn't on board with them, and I'd love to hear a bit about the hierarchy of values for the listeners so they can understand that.
I have had the opportunity to speak quite a bit, and sometimes in front of audiences of different sizes, up to thousands of people. And I ask people sometimes, how many of you want to be financially independent? And of course, most, if not all, the hands go up.
Yeah.
And then after they've done that, they're usually laughing and giggling. And I said, now, what percentage of the population actually obtain financial independence? And usually I hear 1, 3 to 5%.
Yep.
But actually the stats show it's actually less than 1%.
Yep.
And I said, now, if it's less than 1% and 99 to 100% of you put your hands up, what's the discrepancy? And what's the distinction that makes the 1% versus the 99%? And they usually come up with all kind of different answers. And then I say to them, your values dictate that. You have a set of values, and if you have a high value on buying consumables that depreciate in value more than buying assets that go up in value and appreciate in value, you're going to keep spending your money on things that go down and you'll be a slave to money, not its master. And I asked them to write down on a piece of paper, if I gave them 10 million US dollars, what they would do if they had 60 seconds to write down the 10 things they would do with that money if they got it. If I handed them 10 million right now, what would they do with it? And they quickly, in 60 seconds, write down, oh God, if I had that, what I would do with it. And then I asked them to turn it to the person next to them and let them calculate how much of that is still remaining to be able to invest. And believe it or not, at least 20% to 80% of the money is spent within 1 minute.
Yep.
On consumables that depreciate in value. They get a house, get cars, not a rental property, house, cars, trip, boats, clothes, luxuries. And what they do is they don't understand that if they keep putting their money into things that go down in value, the money will never work for them.
No.
And they'll be working as a slave all their life. But if they start to value wealth building, then they're going to want to put their money in only things that go up in value. And I found that when people have a high value in wealth building, that's what they do. And when they have a low value in wealth building, they keep buying things. And I'm not against that because the consumer market makes the economy go. And if you're buying stocks in those consumer markets, you want those people to do that. 99% of the people keep the wealthy but rich. But if you don't have the values for wealth building, you will struggle. Because it's not how much money you make, it's how you manage what you make.
It's how you spend what you earn.
It's how you spend what you earn. So I have people, I mentioned in my program over the weekend that I had a gentleman that earned $6.29 million in 1 year.
Yeah.
And he had to borrow money to pay his taxes at the end of the year because he had spent it on a lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And many people, when they fantasize, and most people, when they market to people fantasizing about financial independence, they put yachts and cars and gold, and they put all this stuff in front of them to make them go, oh, I want that lifestyle. And what people confuse is they say they want financial independence, but they really want the lifestyle.
Absolutely.
And that lifestyle is what costs them their financial independence sometimes, until they've earned it.
Absolutely. But the way that it is advertised, it's almost like, here's the things, but this is what you need to do to earn lots of money to get it. But really, it's two different studies, isn't it?
Well, the people that I have seen that have become financially independent, they get those things because they focus on the math and they understand the math behind what's going on.
Yeah.
And they're more grounded and not fantasizing.
Yeah.
Fantasies don't build wealth. Fantasies are the amygdala. The executive center is what builds wealth. And that executive center is one that has reason and has strategy and has foresight and long-term thinking and is patient, and they want to buy things that go up in value. Money circulates through the economy from those who value it least to those who value it most. So if you have very little money, wealth building appreciation, you buy things, you give it to people, and then they may have no appreciation of money, and they may buy other things. And eventually it circulates through the economy until eventually it goes into the hand of somebody who actually wants to build wealth. And then that individual takes that money from selling something and puts it into something that goes up in value. They'll buy pieces of property, and they'll do rental properties. They'll buy stocks and companies that have dividends and capital gains. They will put their money where it goes up for them.
Yep.
Those are the individuals that eventually have money working for them, and they become the masters. And financial independence is potential. But that is if they have the strategy to serve vast numbers of people to make the income and to make sure that they save and invest over enough period of time with capital gains and compound interest to work in their favor.
You mentioned serving enough to accumulate income, because we need income to build wealth. There's no doubt about that, to build financial independence. And there's almost this kind of epidemic where people are trying to find purpose and really understand what their purpose is. Tell us a little bit about how people can really drill in on their purpose.
Well, every individual has a set of priorities, a set of values that is unique to them. things that are most to least important in their life. Whatever is highest on that value is a thing that they spontaneously, intrinsically are designed and inspired to do. Just like a young boy is like his video games, the video game he's so inspired to do, you don't have to remind him to do it, he just does it. But things like chores, cleaning his room, homework, he didn't want to do that. So he needs external motivation to do it.
Yep.
If you need external motivation to become wealthy, you won't be. It has to be an intrinsic drive, because that's the thing that makes you have discipline.
Yeah.
Because you're disciplined in your highest values that's intrinsic, and you're undisciplined in the things that are low. So you won't have the discipline to follow through on a long-term vision unless you truly have a value in wealth building. So first identify what the values are, and know that the highest value, very highest value, is your purpose. Your purpose is an expression of the most intrinsic call to action, the métier, as they sometimes call, inside the individual. And your life demonstrates it. When I have people in the breakthrough experience, and I see it every week, they say, well, what's my purpose? What's my purpose? I say, look at your life. Look at what you spontaneously do every single day that nobody has to remind you to do, that you spontaneously do and you're inspired by. And they'll pretend like they don't know because they're comparing themselves to other people. Yeah. And as a result of it, they're thinking it should be this, it ought to be this.
Like social expectations.
Yeah, they're trying to fit in as conformists instead of find out what they're uniquely called to do that inspires them. And their life is demonstrating it, but they won't honor it because they're comparing themselves to other people.
Yeah.
And every time you compare yourself to other people, you dilute the clarity of what your own mission is. So finding out what your life demonstrates and building momentum, incremental momentum, doing baby steps until they become big steps, and eventually build momentum that's unstoppable in that area.
Yeah.
Mine happens to be teaching.
Wealth isn't just about cash, is it? I think everyone has wealth in all different areas of their life.
Yes.
And it's a case of that you can monetize any of those areas as well. I believe that wealth building is important because I believe it trickles down to all the other 7 areas. So if I can have a gym membership for my fitness, and I can go and have the best food, I can have good relationships, and it helps. So
well, when a woman is looking for a man, she's looking for a man that's good looking, that's healthy, that's fit, that's proportioned. She's looking for somebody that's intelligent. She's looking for somebody that's got ambition, looking for somebody that's got resources, so she's not having to take care of a little boy. She's looking for somebody that gets along and really wants to be with her and her loved ones. Somebody that's socially savvy and is not an embarrassment socially, that's actually amazingly connected socially. That's a power to her. And also somebody who's inspired by something. So any area of your life you don't empower, people will overpower, and you'll decrease the options you have in life. And financial is one of them. And mastering of the finances and empowering that area of your life is one of the most universal values we have. Because as you said, you can convert almost anything from money into those other things. But you can also convert those other values into money if you package it properly.
Yeah.
I have people that have a tremendous amount of intellectual property and knowledge, but they don't have a value in wealth building, so they sit there and store that knowledge, but there's never any cash. But if you package it properly and sold properly, it could be fortunes. Other people have spiritual awareness. Sri Ravi Shankar was a gentleman I've met and spent time with, and he has made billions sharing spiritual ideas. I have other people that are well physical. They're beautiful, and they have no problem getting billionaire husbands, for instance, because of their beauty.
Yeah.
Or maybe beautiful billionaire women for their handsomeness.
Yeah.
But the point is that everybody has wealth, but it may not have financial wealth until they value financial wealth high enough to convert the other forms of wealth that they have into financial wealth. I didn't learn that till I was 28. Up until 28, I was great at working. I made money, and I always was able to get goals that I wanted if I worked for it.
Yeah.
But I never had money beginning to work for me until I had a shift in values. And it was a gentleman named Jim McKinley that came to me and asked me 10 questions that shifted it. And that's when I realized that I was not going to be financially independent unless I got serious about it. It's not going to happen by fantasy. It's going to happen by doing the due diligence on the numbers and cranking out what's real and what it's going to take, and then follow a strategy to get it.
Yeah. If people think that it's on their highest value, because you get a lot of people believe that they want to be financially independent because there's a kind of, as I say, a bit of an epidemic with it all, and just no one really understands what it is. There's not a lot of tangible kind of, this is when you're financially independent, this is when you're financially free, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get across.
The thing is, there is a very, very specific, reproducible system for what that is.
I know.
And when a person gets that, it's an eye-opener.
Absolutely.
And it's a fantasy until you get that.
Yeah, but what about people who kind of have this negative thought towards money that's kind of holding them back, where they feel like it's evil or...
Well, if they have been inculcating some sort of religious dogma into their life by institutions that have been taking their money, then if they're foolish enough to buy into that, I guess that's why they'll probably have poverty financially. But I like to think of it this way, and just think this through. If you are exaggerating yourself and puffing yourself up with pride and arrogance, and you're talking down to your employees and talking down to your customers, what's likely to happen in the market?
You won't sell any products.
You're not likely to sell, and you won't have fulfilled employees.
No.
Because they're going to work not for you, they're going to work to fulfill their values. So if you're devaluing them, you're not likely to build a lot of business.
No.
And so if you puff yourself up, that undermines business. If you minimize yourself and infatuate with the customer and employees, you'll have anarchy in the company because you're afraid of losing them, and you'll basically suck up to the customer and sacrifice your profit margins.
Yep.
So your margins are gone. So if you minimize yourself, you also undermine wealth building. But if you actually don't go up or down, but come into equity between you and the customer and the employees, and have equanimity in yourself, not pride or shame, you actually have the greatest ability to create sustainable, fair exchange. And according to equity theory, that's the one that's most sustainable for building wealth. In that moment, you're also in a state of equilibrium, and you're not proud or ashamed, so you're most authentic. And you're most authentic, and you're also in a state of equilibrium, you feel most fulfilled, and that is the state of spirituality. So spirituality and materiality are not separated. And the people have separated those two for centuries, but they're actually the same thing. One of the most fulfilling things a person can do when they're in business is make a difference in people's lives with a fair exchange and getting paid exactly what you asked for the service exactly what they asked for. You want to keep working business, and you have business and you have income. And that's fulfilling, and you made a difference. So materiality is maximized to the degree that we actually live authentically and through our spiritual inspired state.
So you mentioned shame and guilt. So sometimes where people have not built wealth in the right way, and I believe there's a method of doing so: save, invest, speculate. And if you don't have those foundations, if you accumulate money quickly, you can make some bad decisions and you can lose it very quickly. Why would people how do people get rid of that kind of guilt or shame if they've done something like that? If they've accumulated some money quickly, gambled it away, lost the money, but they really have a high value on wealth building, they just didn't kind of go about it in the right way.
Well, Warren Buffett said something that was, I think, pretty universal, and I think a lot of people remembered it, that rule number one is don't lose the money. Rule number two is don't forget rule number one. So if you are gambling with your money, you really don't have a value on wealth building. Something to think about.
Yeah.
I was just in Las Vegas a couple weeks ago, and I watched thousands of people get rid of their money there. Yeah. The house wins.
Every time.
Thousands of people were just giving away their money. And so I started interviewing a few of them just out of curiosity when I was sitting there at a place eating, and just asked them questions. And I was amazed at their mindset that was leading them to why they were giving away their money. But shame and guilt is one of the most common things that make us altruistically give for other people. And I always say that pride underlies the narcissism and shame underlies the altruism. And when you're sitting there feeling unworthy and feeling shame and feeling guilty, you'll tend to feel like you owe people things. And consumerism, believe it or not, is partly getting rid of money and giving it to other people and paying ridiculous amounts for a brand that other people make rich on at your own shame. Because you're feeling so unworthy, you're wanting to buy another brand to feel better about yourself. But it's much wiser to build a brand around yourself and do something amazing. So anything that you feel shame or guilt about, it's wise to identify what it is that you've done in the past that you thought you caused more pain or negatives to somebody, and find out how it's served. Because it's not that it actually was something that caused a service. You just never looked for where the service was.
Yeah.
And once you find out where the other side is and clear the shame and guilt, your perception of yourself changes, your worthiness goes up, and your willingness to actually go, you know what, I deserve. And you start to manage money differently.
Yeah.
Speculation, without having a foundation of savings and investments underneath it, usually teaches people that the fool parts of their money. So I don't need to speculate to build wealth. I need to have the numbers in my favor. And that's not hard to do. It's quite easy to do. And it doesn't take major risks to build wealth. It just takes using your reason and your studies. And if you do proper studies, you can get the knowledge it takes to put your money into something that's a true value that serves great numbers of people, that gives you returns.
If someone has this is kind of an action that people can take. If a family dynamic or one person in a partnership or someone is listening to this and they want to build wealth, but they've really got a phobia about accumulation of money for whatever reason that might be, or the partner's holding them back and isn't on the same path, what can they do to kind of empower that journey for both of them?
Well, first is educate themselves, because if they have a fear about it, they don't have a strategy. And that means they haven't taken the time to have enough foresight to mitigate the risks and to put a strategy in place that's been proven. And they're learning from trial and error instead of foresight, mentorship, and planning. So the person that does that is pretty well asking for the gamble, asking for, the probability of not being in their favor. So it's studying, it's planning, it's strategizing, it's mentoring, and building wealth that way. But if for some reason a person is feeling unworthy of it, they'll draw in an individual that will reflect that by doing things that squanders money away. And if you're in a marriage and the individual is unwilling to learn the lesson about how they spend their money, unless you can structure separate accounts where they can't get access to the money, you're probably going to be frustrated. So you have to organize and compartmentalize where all your money goes into appropriate accounts that can't be touched, can't be accessed by people that don't have a value in wealth building, until it gets so much that the amount that they want to squander is insignificant, so it doesn't affect you. Or you're probably off saying, you know what, I think that because you choose to play that with money, and I think it's a bit disrespectful in my perception, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you find somebody that would love to go do that route with you, and I'm going to find me a new mate that's willing to grow wealth with me.
Yeah.
And thank you for what I've learned from you, and move on. Because I have a case where there was a woman that was trying to spend a large sum of money every month, about $70,000 a month, and her husband was getting kind of burned out on it. And finally, he realized, I'm cutting off the spigot. And of course, there was fighting and yelling and screaming for about 2 to 3 weeks over it. And eventually, he finally sat her down and he says, so this is the game plan. I'm going to move on, or we're going to work as a team.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, we're not a team. And she chose to finally, after a little hemming and hawing, she decided, well, to try to teamwork. And he actually, as he did that, as he's accumulating money, he put an incentive program in that as it accumulates, she'll get a higher percentage. So it taught her how to be long-term instead of immediate gratification.
Okay. So finally then, if I was to say, what would be your top strategies for building wealth? For building financial freedom whilst being able to live an inspired life?
Well, it depends on what your inspiration is. In my case, it's primarily teaching. If I was in the business and my inspiration was purely managing money, they may be one and the same thing. My career path and managing money may be the same. But I love mainly teaching. Okay. So if I'm in a situation where I love teaching and I want my money and my investments to be able to grow passively without me having to be focused on it all the time, then that's a different modality and approach than if you are actively engaged in building wealth and managing money and things of this nature. So I don't know if there's one answer, because it depends on what role you want to play in money management. I don't want to sit there and have to look at the money management every day.
No.
So I chose to put my money into investments and diversify them through index funds and buy them in properties with rental properties and art approaches. I decided to put them into things that I don't have to focus on and just keep buying them. And so I've been buying stocks for 36 years, never stopped.
Yep.
and I've never spent any of it. It's been re-dividend invested, and it's never had any taxation on it. It just keeps growing, and it's grown at sixfold, 6 times doubled, and that's pretty good in 36 years. So I've seen enormous growth in that without having to do a thing.
Yep.
But I've also, over the years, dabbled with buying companies and assisting and consulting with companies and growing it that way and getting shares out of the companies. There's been different approaches, but some are more active and some are more passive. I prefer the passive one, so I'm the least amount of distraction from what I love doing the most. So it depends on what your needs are. If you're actively engaged and love to do the deals and love to do managing your money, you may want to buy companies and raise and build the companies and put management teams in there and sell the companies or get dividends and growth of the company and income from the company. It all depends on your particular set of values, what you're going to be loving to do. And some people I know really love the real estate world, and they're in developing. One of my friends that I've lectured with in Australia is Maha Sinnathamby. He came from Malaysia, and he came and bought a big property, dirt cheap, and built a new city. It's got 100,000 people in it in 20 years.
Right.
So he started from scratch, a piece of raw land, and built billions.
Yep.
So his love is property development, building. That's not mine. So it depends on what your highest values are, what you love doing, and the way you want to do it, and what that strategy might be.
Yeah, I guess the kind of question where I was going with it is, people have got this kind of delusion that once you've become financially independent, you're just going to sit on a beach and drink a load of cocktails and that's it. You're going to sell the phone and sell the cameras and shut everything off and that's it.
Well, if you're not doing something that's meaningful, that inspires you, that you love doing to build your wealth, very commonly when you do accumulate easy money, it ends up in debauchery. And debauchery means you're drinking, you're partying, you're in the amygdala, you're doing drugs, you're doing things like the Wall Street man, Wolf on Wall Street.
Yeah.
To me, that's the foolish thing to do with money. But if you're doing something that's extremely meaningful that you love doing, Bill Gates is one example, Buffett's one example, I'm an example. When you're doing something you really, really love doing, you want to continue to do that and make a contribution. And I'm not saying it has to be philanthropic necessarily, although it usually ends up that way. But you love doing what you're doing. And building wealth that way is what I recommend for people. Finding the thing you love doing and structuring it in such a way that it can serve, through leverage, ever greater numbers of people, so you can build something that's a brand that actually makes you a great fortune, serving people in a way that's deeply meaningful, that you love doing.
Okay, so anyone who's kind of interested in more of your work, whereabouts can they find you?
Well, probably the easiest place to find me is just go to my website, and that's drdemartini.com, DRDEMARTINI.com. On there is an educational website. You can spend the rest of your life on there just learning.
Yeah. And have you got any programs coming up in London soon, or the next?
I've got the training program starting Wednesday, which is the Demartini Method training program, which I teach facilitators around the world. I've got an evening program and a couple of programs next Monday and Tuesday. And then I'm off to Abu Dhabi, and then I go off to Australia, and then I just keep going. So.
And when are you next back in London for the breakthrough?
I believe February. I'll be back in February.
February 2020. Excellent. Well, thank you for coming on, John. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
And I wish you all the best.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share.
Thank you. All right, that's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. And if you got something from this podcast, let me know in the comments. Please leave a rating or review or both. And also, if you're interested in John's work, all of the links are below for his up-and-coming programs. If you want to get on board with that, I highly recommend them. I cannot recommend the Breakthrough Experience enough. And also, if you feel like you got something from this or any of these podcasts and you feel like someone you know needs to hear this, someone who would really appreciate the information that I'm giving out in this podcast for free, please share this with them and spread the message far and wide. So that's it for this episode, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, have a great rest of your day and weekend, and I'll see you then.
Subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. For news on all future events and updates, go to jasongreystone.com.